35. There's a strong consensus, a report on ESPN, and I also back and forth with Todd Berry. FBS coaches signaled support for several key changes, rules changes in college football. One of them, potential for an earlier signing day period, extended bowl eligibility, and reevaluation of limits on the on-field coaches. The frustrations that schools playing by the rules on issues including tampering, sideline headset use, and on-field contact for support staff were being hamstrung, while those who flouted the guidelines endured no serious repercussions.
Well, that's kind of a weird way in life to change a rule. But it comes when you can't enforce something. So if I'm going to give everybody extra headsets on the sideline, and what's going to happen to me when I'm caught? Nothing. Well,
why not?
Why not do it? So then, okay, then let's change that rule and just, first of all, why does that rule exist? Does it exist for a reason that everybody couldn't be equitable with unlimited headsets on the sidelines? Because eventually there's only so many voices that can be heard. So what benefit does it have if you had, if the rule now is, I don't know what the exact number is, but say it's 20.
You have 10 on-field coaches.
But it's headsets on the sideline would be maybe some more people as well that are not necessarily on-field coaches. They're just, but whatever it is. So say you've got 15 overall headsets. Well, and the teams that are flaunting this are using 22. What benefit are they gaining from those 22 that you couldn't also gain?
Is Gary Patterson on a headset this year?
I don't think so. But
he was there.
Yeah.
There was, and believe me, the chat room, you can tell me if I'm wrong, or the replay later on with all that goes down, and whoever else on Twitter, thank you. But I thought that the analysts were supposed to be analysts, that they weren't supposed to be so much game day coaches. I think that's already kind of there's a gray area there.
Yeah.
And I'm using Gary Patterson as a great example because he's an analyst at Texas. He's not the defensive coordinator.
But my point being, and this is just me asking, is the rules in place to make sure, right, that there's not 75 coaches on the sideline and all that stuff because a school like Georgia can afford that and a school like Utah State can't. Right? So there's not, or Vanderbilt doesn't have it in the budget. But if the number really, if you look at what the realistic number is, so the schools that you have popped for doing this, that have gotten in trouble for it, what's the average that they're doing? So if 15 people have a headset legally and 24 people have a headset illegally, is 24 tilting the balance of power so much that you can't just make this not a rule?
Isn't
That's
that like
the question
having,
I have to answer.
I would think that having an extra, I even though it sound like a cluster blank, if you ask me, like an air traffic controller with too many planes coming in. To me, if you're supposed to have 15 and there's a team that has 20 or 17 or whatever, I would think that's an advantage. Yeah. I don't know what the number is.
But they'd have to, to me, they just have to show me why it is an advantage compared to it. Because I don't know. Because, again, like you said.
Because you have more people live discussing something at that moment.
Yeah,
isn't it better to have 9? You would think it'd be less is more. But
that's my point.
But if you have 15, for example, here's Dave Clawson. With tampering, with analyst coaching, you can't enforce it. And if you can't enforce it, why have it? The analysts are not supposed to be coaching.
Yeah, I think you and I are diverging on paths when we kind of agree here. I'm just saying, you kind of agree with me that the more people, if all of us started talking in the microphone right now, people wouldn't understand what you're saying. The more people you have on headset, it probably creates chaos. I guess to put it simply is, okay, who are the teams that are doing this, and does it show that they're winning? So is Georgia doing this?
Obviously somebody is.
Is Ohio State doing this? Or is A&M doing this, and they're 5-7? So 5-7 teams are doing it, and 14-0 teams are doing it. What's the difference?
Yeah, I'm not really I'm far more interested in the signing day part of what's being discussed. I think that's way more interesting in terms of impact. But on the analyst side of things, I mean, I would say on the one hand, you're right about the traffic jam that, a lot of voices could potentially have. But then again, who's on headset, who's not, I don't know in this scenario how that would work. I mean, you do have to have a chain of command still. You do have to have, some clean lines of communication. So I don't think that having more analysts means that everybody's on a headset and everybody's talking. I think that it's still the main voices talking the loudest. And I would just say on the, like, having more cooks in the kitchen isn't necessarily a good thing. I would just pose to you, Paul, of like, then how would this show run if we got rid of Jack and we got rid of Emery and we got rid of Jacob and it was just us four? We could still do it, but we would be able to do what we've been doing and all we've been doing and how thorough we've been doing it without those guys. And that's where I think the analyst comes into play. And Jacob's like, yeah, I mean, we'd probably be better.
I would walk
stealthier,
out the door,
by
the way. It'd be just three of you.
But no, really, like, there's stuff that we don't have to do or that's done that we wouldn't have thought of because there's other people here. And I think that when you're looking at an analyst, like, having more eyes on that team you're getting ready to play, somebody might see something. Like, who's that next Garrett McGuire that's like this boy genius, that like is one of your analysts that gets you the key to beating Florida that week, and
then he's on game day with a headset.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't know, again, I'm not so caught up in the logistics of the staffs and stuff like that. I've really delved into how the headsets are divvied out and like what, like, that's for the far more hardcore junkies as far as that part of the game goes. But that's where I do see the benefit of it. And if you're pouring over game tape, like, you have more guys to break down the same things, well, then you can get through 10 weeks of your next opponent with twice as many guys a lot quicker than you can with, half as many guys.
Yeah, I'm
that's where I see the benefit.
I'm going to get the answer from
But
Baylor.
yeah, I mean, because like I have mine are just questions about it, because I do think, like, if you let it go, I don't think it's going to be like one of those things where you have the recruiting bank like that Alabama had, where it's just essentially a hotline of people calling recruits all the time, like they're trying to fundraise for a political party. I think that you'll eventually hit critical mass with a number, and you'll find that. And I don't know if that number is something that everybody couldn't do to where it would be equitable. So again, if you're only allowed 15 and Georgia's secretly using 25, could you also let 10 people do it, and you already have those guys on staff?
I don't think you could secretly have somebody with a headset on.
No. Okay.
I'm just kidding with you.
Yeah. All right.
All right, let's get back to the signing day.
Yeah.
SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey noted his concerns with an existing signing day structure earlier this week, lamenting that the December signing day overlapped with the transfer portal and bowl prep to create an unworkable logjam that impacted team seasons. Sankey has advocated returning to a single signing day in early February with college football for years before introducing the later date. I don't see that ever going back to just February only. It would be nice if the signing day was earlier and the transfer portal was right after that, instead of the chaos of doing both these things at the same time. It's so chaotic right now. Mack Roach said that yesterday, where everyone's pulling their hair out, including the student athletes who are being recruited.
Yeah, Dabo Sweeney's theory on it is to have it, you can sign anytime after August 1st, so you can weed out the fake offers, which I think is
like that idea.
I actually really do like after August 1st, you can sign, so you can have that time, you can still recruit.
All right, but what about a guy commits on August 15th, and we see this now, and all of a sudden on September 20th, Scott Frost is gone?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's mechanisms in place for that now, so
then why have it?
Well, I mean, there's mechanisms in place for it, so why not have it? So there's rules in place for, look, Jaden Rashada just decommitted from Florida. He's already signed his national letter of intent. He's been there for 9 days, right? So he's backing out. There's a mechanism for it. So, I mean, what changes what the day is, whether that mechanism is put in place.
Yeah, you'd wish that, and again, I know the argument would be you can't force a guy if he signs a letter of intent that he has to go to that school. Again, it's not about where he signs or who he signs with, the school, whatever. That gets complicated. And right now, basically, in whatever you sign, it doesn't matter anyway because of what you just kind of said. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, that's the thing is if you're just going to give waivers to everybody, then, what's the point? But, I mean, just if you're taking this on the surface, because, like, I mean, it's like the analyst thing. Like, we can delve into, like, well, what if this happens and what if that happens? Like, just on the surface, like, if some people think that there is a need for more analysts, then there's obviously some advantage that they see. But I've also read articles before, because you also lump in quality control coaches, and it's all kind of the same sort of thing. That's some ways for guys to get their foot in the door and work their way up. I think the big fear with that, and I know we're getting to the signing period part of it, but just finishing up my thoughts from the other thing, I think the thing with that is you have these people that get worried that Nick Saban suddenly going to stash Gary Patterson, and he's going to stash, like, Sark, and he's going to stash, like, all of these guys, and they're going to have, like, a other coaching staff with the coaching staff. But it's never really worked out that way. I think maybe the limitations have placed some on that. But, I do think Paul's point of like, I mean, what's the cap? Like, is 50 guys going to be enough? You know, I mean, and that's varied. Like, if you look at Nick Saban, when he's had in years past, like the ability to have a certain amount of coaches, it isn't always the maximum amount. He's actually gone backwards before. So I think it's all just whatever the right chemistry is for each team. So I'm not too worried about that analyst part of it and some of that goes, because there can be too much on a coaching staff. But I do think people fear like a stowing away and accumulating all the talent to yourself kind of a situation. But as far as
10 coaches, isn't that about for recruiting? Isn't that
that's
the
who can
number?
go out, go on the road and go recruit for you. Yeah. So
But,
that's why it's, like when George DeLeon got hurt, they made Sean Bell like the O-line coach because they needed an O-line coach to go out and be able to recruit because George DeLeon couldn't go out and recruit. And so that was why that title was important and transferred the way that it was. But yeah, like I said, there's a lot of details to that part of it that is probably better explained by others who have dabbled in all of that and how that works. But as far as the early signing day goes, I mean, yes, I roll when I think of like, the amount of waivers. It's great for the players, but it does leave something to be desired in terms of like what actually means anything. Like if a guy can just pretty much leave whenever. So taking that out of the equation, because that's still something to be solved for later, I do think, especially after this past year, that they've got to do something to kind of even up or loosen up the traffic jam, because there was, from our experience, I'm hosting a National Signing Day show on Wednesday, and Baylor's in a bowl game 2 days later, and they're trying to close the class, make visits beforehand,
People
have
opting out,
practices,
transferring,
Christmas break, transfer portal, and then, hey, go play Air Force. It's like that's – I know they get paid millions to do a lot of things, but like that, you are piling so much on somebody's plate that it's almost unworkable. And they worked through it, but it wasn't easy. And that was the case for a lot of other teams who played around that time as well. So I do think this year's was particularly later in the cycle, and just the way that it ran up was weird as far as just feeling really congested. So I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting to maybe go a different route. Now that we've experimented and kind of seen how the 2 signing days work for the last few years, I don't think we should just say like, okay, this is just the way that it is and not look at it. I do think if there are some issues with it, and it does appear there are some issues with it, let's look at it and see if we can make it better. I don't know if it's necessarily going back to the traditional first Wednesday of February and that's it. I don't know if that's keeping December but maybe bumping it up. I don't know what the solution is, but I do think it's worth looking at, because that was quite the dilemma that was posed to a lot of coaches who are just simply trying to sign a class, but you're also asking them to prepare for a bowl game, deal with the transfer portal, keep their own roster at home, and like that's not really, that's not really workable.
All right.